In this video, we are going to be covering three different cultural groups in Mesoamerica: the Mixtecs, the Tarascans or Purepecha, and the Aztecs. The Aztecs portion will just be the beginning of the Aztecs origin myth, as they come into central Mexico. We'll continue on with the Aztecs next week. So let's get started with the Mixtecs. We'll talk a little bit about Mixtec politics. Amongst the Mixtecs, you don't have a large empire, right? So there's no like huge empire that's ruled by an emperor as you will have with the Aztecs. Instead, with the Mixtecs, you're going to have a number of different kingdoms, and those kingdoms may rule over a number of different villages. And so these kingdoms will sometimes be going to war with each other. You won't have very many large cities amongst the Mixtecs. Mostly they're on a smaller scale than what you find in other areas or other civilizations in Mesoamerica. And so why the warfare between various different Mixtec states? A lot of it is over land. Why land? They have huge populations. Well, the point really is it arable land, right? Is this land that could be used for agriculture? That is the land that they're looking for, and that's why you have the Mixtecs expanding into different regions or conquering other states, because they're trying to expand their amount of arable land so that they could farm and grow more food for their people. Right? And so that's why you have battles going on between the various Mixtec states. One ruler who was known for his conquest was a ruler by the name of 8 Deer Jaguar Claw. 8 Deer being the day that he was born, right, in the calendar, in the ritual calendar. The story of 8 Deer Jaguar Claw is pretty interesting. He comes from an upper class background, although he doesn't come from a ruling family. Often the Mixtec leadership came from ruling families, these lineages that were considered sacred, right, who had the right to rule. But 8 Deer did not. Instead, he comes from a upper class family. His dad was a high priest in Tilantongo, which is one of the Mixtec states. And from there, 8 Deer would go on to create his own state in Tutepec, near the coast. He would conquer peoples in that area, and then later on he would also conquer his home state of Tilantongo, and then afterwards he would go on conquering. And so he was known for his conquests. Later on, though, he would be killed eventually by the son of a queen from one of the states that he conquered, right? Sometimes in his conquest he would murder the ruling families of those states once he conquered them. And so in one of those states he murdered the king and his queen, his wife, the lord and the lady, and the son of this woman would go on to murder 8 Deer later on. But 8 Deer was known for this, for his conquests, and it was kind of brutal at times. And so yes, warfare, actual military warfare was one way that the Mixtec states would conquer other states and expand their territory. But there was another way as well, a more diplomatic way, and that was through intermarriage into royal families. So for example, 8 Deer Jaguar Claw, who we were just talking about, he intermarried into royal families. He had at least 5 different wives. So sometimes, in expanding his territory, he would do it through intermarriage. Sometimes he would murder those families. Sometimes people would do both. Right? And so intermarriage is a way, a diplomatic way of expanding your territory. So if you are, say, a prince from one state, you may want to get married to a princess in another state. You marry into that royal family, and through that intermarriage, you would be seen as a legitimate ruler in that state, right? If you were to come to the throne, you'd be legitimate because you're married into that royal family. So that's another way of expanding your territory as these different Mixtec states are going to war with each other or expanding into each other's territory, right? So it could be done through marriage, it could be done through war, it could be done through both avenues, right? That happened as well, where you have some Mixtec rulers maybe conquering a state militarily, but then also marrying into the local royal family so that they are seen as legitimate by the local people, and maybe that would stop an uprising by the locals there. Eventually, the Mixtec royal families of the different states intermarried so much that you had relatives sometimes marrying each other in order to preserve those royal bloodlines. You hear about this in other civilizations around the world, such as in Egypt, right? And so you have, in some cases, even brothers and sisters marrying each other amongst the Mixtecs to preserve that royal bloodline, right? Last thing on Mixtec politics, later on as we see the rise of the Aztecs, what is their relationship like with the Mixtecs? Well, it's one of warfare. Okay, the Aztecs would attempt to conquer the Mixtecs, but the Mixtecs would not be completely conquered, right? Maybe some areas, but not all of them. And how do they manage this? Well, the Mixtecs, they are also allied with another powerful group in the area, the Zapotecs or Zapotecs, and so through intermarriage and through alliances with the Zapotecs, the Mixtecs would be able to fight off the Aztecs and be able to avoid complete conquest. Last thing on the Mixtecs, Mixtec writing. Yes, like other Mesoamerican civilizations, the Mixtecs had their own writing system. And so some of their codices, which are their books, survive to this day. These are books that were written a lot of times on deer skin. Okay, so basically you'd have this deer skin, it would be flattened, beaten down, they'd put this type of plaster over it, and then they would paint on it, okay? Here's an example of what one of those would look like, right? These type of paintings. Sometimes you could read them from left to right, sometimes they could be read from right to left. It just depends on each page, right? There's no uniform way of reading one of these codices. So what are these codices about? What are they writing about? A lot of times they're writing about history, and a lot of times that history is focused on a particular hero or leader. So native rulers are often the central characters of these histories, and the actions of these native rulers tend to represent what was going on for the people during that time. Right, so the rulers are kind of the center point of that history, but it's telling the story of that period of time of what was happening. Another big topic of the codices is warfare, right? We talked about how warfare was going on, especially in the post-classic period. That's what it's really known for. It's one of the characteristics of that post-classic period. After the classic civilizations have fallen, there's a lot of warfare going on. We talked about the Toltecs. That's an example. They were one of those societies who expanded through warfare and dominated in central Mexico because of their prowess as warriors. All right. So in these Mixtec codices, you would also see the subject of war being brought up quite a bit. Another big topic that you would see in the codices is genealogies, right? When I say genealogy, I'm talking about like the family tree. We're tracing the family tree going back. And this isn't just for regular individuals. This is usually for the ruling family. Okay? And why do you think they would want a genealogy for the ruling family, showing who's related to who? For legitimacy, right? To show that they are a legitimate ruler of that state. And these genealogies, they go all the way back to a mythical ancestor, right? An ancestor who is godlike, right? Who has usually like an immaculate conception, meaning that they were born out of like a tree, or maybe they were born out of a stone, or they came out of the sky, out of the heavens or the earth, right? This ancestor has like mythical origins, and these ruling families can trace their lineages all the way back to that ancestor. Okay, and so yes, legitimacy is one of the main reasons why you see genealogies in the writings of the Mixtecs. They want to show that yes, our family is a legitimate ruling family. All right, and so also you would see in their writings, it would talk about how these families have the rights to rule specific areas and specific regions. Okay, and so they're basically writing it down, cementing that fact that yes, these ruling families, they have a right to rule these areas. They come from a divine lineages, and they can trace that lineage all the way back to this mythical ancestor of theirs, right? And finally, the last thing on Mixtec writing is something called puzzle writing. And so what is puzzle writing? Basically, if you're trying to write something that's difficult to draw, you could substitute it by drawing a picture of something that is a homonym for that word. Okay, so what do I mean? So like in our language, right, in English, the word deer, right? Deer has a number of different meanings, right? There's an actual animal that we call a deer, and then there's someone that's dear to your heart. Two different meanings. It's kind of hard to draw deer, someone being dear to you. How would you draw that? Would you draw like a heart or something? Or maybe you would draw deer, right? And if you're reading something, you know that, and it would be completely out of context for them to all of a sudden bring up an animal, you know, the animal deer, right? If it makes sense in that context that they're talking about someone that they care about, you would realize, oh, they're talking about someone that's dear to them. Okay, so basically the word sounds the same, but it's easier to depict that word. And so that's why they would draw that. And so that's puzzle writing, trying to draw abstract concepts or meanings, and the way that you do that is by substituting it for its homonym, right? A word that sounds the exact same but has a different meaning.